Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. All my thanks and gratitude for Allah for His uncountable blessing. I am Mumtaz Naeem, a visiting teacher in Faculty of English in University of Education, Attic campus. Today's the topic of my lecture is the depiction of true and pure love in Charlotte Bronte's novel, that is Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre. Okay. First of all, I would like to give brief introduction of Charlotte Bronte's. Charlotte Bronte was born in 1816 at Thornton in North Yorkshire. But when she was 4, her father became rector of Haworth, and the family moved into the parsonage, which was to be Charlotte's home all her life. In 1821, when Charlotte was just 5, her mother died and all 5 sisters were sent to live in an orphanage. Charlotte and her sisters were avid readers of Shakespeare's, Milton, Byron, Scott, the classic and the Bible. She and her sisters showed an early gift for writing. As a form of amusement, they wrote miniature books about fantasy worlds of their own creation. In 1835, Charlotte left family home and took up a position as a teacher, but soon returned home suffering from homesickness. Charlotte worked for a time as governess in Brussels before returning and settling in Haworth. She began to move in literary circles. She traveled around England and wrote a novel set in Brussels, Villette, 1853. Charlotte Bronte's contributions, reputations, writing career. Charlotte Bronte began writing as a child, and she was still writing in the years of her death. Her known spans 26 years, from her imitation of Blackwood's magazine to her unfinished last novel, Emma. She usually wrote rapidly, feeling herself impelled to dash on. Sometimes she was overwhelmed by the need to write. At Roohead in 1835, she noted, I'm just going to write because I cannot help it. She welcomed this creative force, describing it as something that at times strangely wills and works for itself. And she remarks in Shirley that those who possess this imagination would not give it for gold. For most of her writing life, for most of her writing life, she did nothing to discourage this urge, which often led her to disregard the stricter requirements of organization. Plots of her novel. None of her plots achieve the coherence of Emily's or Anne's. She is often tempted to include long irrelevant passages such as Lucy's visit to London in Villette, and she sometimes relies too heavily, especially in Jane Eyre and Villette, on improbable coincidence. The plot of Shirley is astonishingly wayward for a writer of such skill. However, she learned from this novel, and as she became more distrustful of her inspiration, she spent more time on her plots. Villette is much more solidly constructed, and there are signs that in her last fragment, Emma, she intended she intended to discipline her creative urges yet further. Jane Eyre as an autobiographical novel. Jane Eyre is the first novel of a writer whose identity is concealed from the curious, a pseudonym. It is not only the finest novel of Charlotte Bronte's, it is perhaps the finest novel of our time. In no other modern novel does one encounter three characters so worthy of attention, for which gap the imagination so powerfully as those of the little governess, the erring aristocrat, and the despotic clergyman. Charlotte Bronte's experience as governess left her embittered about the wealthy, layered classes. It was not until late in her life that she encountered wealth combined with kindness. With the exception of Rochester and Shirley, all her chief characters and all whom she admires are people who have to earn their own living. The wealthy, such as the Ingrams, do not command her respect, and indeed some are overdrawn to the point of caricature. Bronte's second masterpiece, Shirley, 1849, is a book about the predicament of women in love who suffer from unrequited love, women who have never and never will be loved. Charlotte never underestimates the power of love. In all her novels, it overcomes formidable barrier of religion, wealth, and rank, and endures through hopelessness and pain. The novel's two chief love stories are interlinked with other loves and marriages, past and present. Although it must be assumed that the marriage of Shirley and Lois and Caroline and Robert will be happy marriage in Shirley's are few and far between. Mrs. Pryor's marriage was disastrous. Hellstone had made his wife wretched. Yark married Hester only because he was jilted elsewhere, and Hester's views on marriage are briskly cynical, with the exception of Louis. The husbands and the men in love do not behave well. Robert proposes to Shirley for reasons of business, and the curate Malone sees no disgrace in pursuing marriage for wealth. In all her writings careers, Charlotte shows herself sharply aware of class structure in its relation both to rank and to wealth. Her own experience as a governess left her with a hostile contempt for the kind of prosperous worldly families who had employed her. The chief theme in Charlotte's Village 1833. The chief themes in Charlotte's Village 1833 are all encompassed with Lucy's love story. In the meantime, she grows painfully from an observant and despair to a loving, liberated woman. Charlotte's idea of womanhood in the novel, that is Professor, that was written in 1800, 1857. In the Professor's 1857, we have a description of Charlotte's ideal of womanhood. Henry is an independent, warm, intelligent woman who pays for her own lessons by lace mending. She survives her dismissal, her aunt's death, and the loss of William with courage before she finds security as a teacher. She has the spirit to stand up to the aggressive Hunsden and insists that she retains her teaching post after marriage. She has little of Lucy's repressed emotional fervor, but they have much else in common. Taken in one dose, these accumulated virtues are difficult to swallow, but she has also the necessary qualities of independence, truth and honor, and the flame of natural passion burning under the eye of reasons. Henry is the first sketch of the typical Charlotte's heroine in her typical posture, orphaned, little, plain, unnoticed, poor, but independent of spirit, firm of principle, and ambitious. Had Charlotte chosen to present the story through her eyes, the novel might have been less wooden. As it is, we see her only through Crimsworth's eyes, and in this way, the main characteristics of her heroine is smothered, her strong, spirited egoism, which is revealed through thought and feeling as much as through deed. The portrayal of true and pure love in Jane Eyre. The main theme of Jane Eyre. The chief theme of Jane Eyre is revealed as a girl's growth to mature independence and an equal partnership in love. Jane achieves her independence by her own spirited struggle through adversity, and she understands in the end that she is her own woman and can manage her own life. Although she chooses to devote herself to Rochester, she is not dependent on him, and her choice is free. Not only is she free, but in her own eyes, she is eventually his equal, equal as we are. She cries when they finally come together. The development of young Jane's love for Rochester, with all It reveals of the difficulties of a satisfactory relationship in love and marriage, and it lies at the core of the novel. The story of Jane Eyre. Jane's stories begins when she was uh, 10 years old. She was an orphan in the house of her aunt, the authoritarian and unfeeling Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed accuses her of lying. As a punishment, she sends her to Lowood Institution. After an unhappy adolescence there, she becomes a teacher and finds a job as as a governess to Adelaide, the illegitimate daughter of Mr. Rochester. Jane and Rochester fall in love, but on their wedding day, she discovers that mysterious mad woman who lives in total seclusion in Rochester's house is really his wife. Despite his desperate pleas, Jane runs away and is cared for by the Rivers family. She learns that she and Rivers are cousins and that she has inherited a considerable sum of money. When she is on the point of marrying Reverend Saint John Rivers and immigrating to India, she telepathically hears Rochester's voice asking her to help him. She goes to Rochester's hall and finds it burnt down. Although Rochester has been blinded, she marries him and his sight is partially restored. Jane's story reveals also an abiding concern with religion and the right relation to God. Several different attitudes to faith are exhibited and rejected in her novels. Mr. Brocklehurst's cruel hypocrisy, Saint John's cold fanaticism, Helen's gentle acceptance, Mrs. Reed's refusal to forgive, and Eliza's rigid Catholicism are all censured in various forms, fiercely, gently, or covertly. To Jane uh, believes it is right to struggle against adversity, but hatred and revenge are not permitted. To conclude, it is also clear from all of her novels uh, when we when we think of uh, Charlotte's Bronte art of characterizations, we find that there are autobiographical elements in her novel. What are these autobiographical elements in her novel? Dear students, I would like to tell you that there are characters in her novels which describe Charlotte's thoughts and feelings. And these characters are close reflection of her own. Here I would like to tell you that her painful conviction of her own lack of beauty, her views on love and marriage, her motherless state, her high intelligence, and her perseverance in adversity. These are all traits she shares with her heroines. But the fact that so much is drawn from Charlotte's life does not detract from the achievement of the book. Her creative intensity is such that all the material, real and invented, is equally fused into the stuff of her story. Jane Eyre and idea of true and pure love. Depiction of true and pure love in her novels. Jane sees marriage as based on romantic love. Her passion for Rochester reveals itself trembling and flushing, and she is apprehensive about the strength of her own feelings. She rebuffs his advances, refuses to be treated to jewels and riches, and refuses to become his mistress. When they married, she sees herself fulfilled as bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. Like her, however, he is capable of learning from experience, and he grows in stature through the book. Again, like Jane, he grows through suffering, which all his hopes of happiness and then his physical strength as well are removed from him. He struggles painfully through to a gentleness and calm. When Jane finds him at Ferndean, he has come bitterly to regret his attempted bigamy. He is mellowed and chastened, and has found a new strength in his submission to God's will. Although to today's reader her words seem so guarded, Charlotte never wrote so frankly again. Critics accused her of coarseness and crudity, and the attack went deep. Depiction of true and pure love in the novel uh, is a dominant theme uh, in this novel, that is Emma. Jane is when Jane set out for Thornfield next day, she arrives a day and a half later. She finds it a blackened ruin over there. She discovers that it was burnt down by Betha, who perished in the fire, while Rochester lost his sight and his left hand. He is now at his other house, Ferndean, 30 miles away. Jane finds him there, blind and helpless. He is at first unbelieving, then overwhelmed with joy. They arrange their marriage and realize that each heard the despairing cry of the other. Writing 10 years after the event, Jane finds their marriage perfect. Rochester has recovered his sight of one eye and is able to see their firstborn son. The last lines of the book are with Saint John Rivers, who will soon die in his noble Christian service in India. Jane's struggle is a hard one. After the broken marriage at Thornfield, she is unwilling to leave her lover, Mr. Rochester, although she has seen the danger. Jane surmounts the obstacles and returns to Mr. Rochester's and succeeds in obtaining true love and leads a happy life with him after a hard struggle. According to Charlotte Bronte, love and marriage are dissoluble. Conclusion: in an age when women were denied access to education and excluded from political debate, the publication of Jane Eyre was like a breath of fresh air. Her fiery, independent temperament and fearless conviction were characteristics that went against the traditional portrayal of women. Charlotte Bronte, the most outstanding of the Bronte sisters, was not prepared to accept a world where women were second-class citizens. Jane Eyre is not only Charlotte Bronte's finest novel, it is perhaps the finest novel of our time. Charlotte Bronte admired men who were strong in will. She expected in marriage to be well ruled and ordered by an exacting, rigid, law-giving, and passionate husband. Through her protagonist Jane, the writer Bronte reflects that marriage without pure and true love is lifeless and motionless one. Therefore, an ideal husband or wife selection is based on pure love. Mr. Rochester's and Jane marry, not in that first violent physical anguish in which we saw them, but in a calmer, nobler mood, all passion spent. Neither the flesh nor the spirit will tear Jane again. Far from her double ordeal, she has emerged unscathed, neither a profligate nor an ascetic, but a woman who has found an equable solution to the age-old problem which troubled others besides the Victorian, but which troubled them intensely. To conclude, that is Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, as it appears to us, a new contribution in English fiction which reflects aspects of early Victorian social and economic phenomena. What Charlotte Bronte achieved in Jane Eyre was the cornerstone for a generation after generation. Dear students, there are the references from which the help was taken to write or to tell you about this topic. These references will help you a lot. Dear students, there are the references over here on the slide. You can see over there. Okay, thank you very much.